The call came at 11:47 p.m., and it changed everything. Sergeant Daria Owen had just finished a 12-hour shift at Mercy General, the kind of shift that leaves your feet aching and your mind somewhere between exhaustion and numbness. She was a trauma nurse, 31 years old, Army Reserve, 2 tours in Germany supporting forward surgical teams. She'd seen people die on tables. She'd held pressure on wounds while helicopters landed in the dark. She did not rattle easily. But standing in the hospital parking garage, fumbling with her keys, she felt something cold move through her. Her phone was ringing. Unknown number. She answered anyway. "Is this Daria Owen?" A man's voice. Flat, official. "Yes, this is Detective Harwell with the Claremont PD. We need you to come in for questioning." "Tonight," she almost laughed. "Excuse me? It's regarding an incident at Mercy General. We have a complaint filed against you. We'd like to do this voluntarily, but we can arrange otherwise." She stood very still in the garage. The fluorescent lights buzzed above her. Her car was 10 feet away, dark blue sedan, still warm from the afternoon. She stared at it for a moment. "What incident?" she asked. "We'll discuss that when you come in." That was the setup. That was the first move. She just didn't know it yet. Daria had started at Mercy General 4 years ago, fresh from her second deployment, and still carrying that particular military stillness that made patients trust her immediately. She was the kind of nurse who remembered names, who asked about family members from previous visits, who caught the mistakes other people missed. The decimal point off in a dosage order, the allergy notation buried 3 screens deep in a chart. She was also the kind of nurse who reported things. That was the problem. 8 weeks before the phone call, she had filed a formal complaint against a hospital administrator named Grover Tillis. Tillis ran the staffing and scheduling department, which meant he controlled overtime approvals, shift assignments, and, in ways that weren't supposed to exist, but very much did, who got the good shifts and who didn't. What Daria had discovered wasn't subtle once you knew where to look. Tillis was running a system. Nurses who didn't push back got first pick of holiday scheduling. Nurses who reported safety concerns suddenly found themselves assigned to the worst overnight rotations, back to back, until they were too exhausted to think clearly. 2 nurses had resigned in the past year. One had filed a workers' comp claim for burnout-related illness. Daria had documented everything. Dates, shift records, written complaints that had been quietly rerouted to Tillis himself for internal review. She had gone to HR. HR had referred her back to Tillis's department. She had gone to the state nursing board. She was still waiting on a response. Then she had gone to the hospital's patient safety officer, a quiet woman named Dr. Nora Vess, who had looked at Daria's documentation for a long time before saying, "You understand what you're doing?" "Yes," Daria said. "He has friends in this building. I know." Dr. Fitch had nodded slowly and accepted the file. That was 6 weeks before the phone call. She drove herself to the Claremont Police Department. She probably should have called a lawyer first. Later, she would think about that moment in the parking garage, the decision to just go, because she had nothing to hide, because she was tired, because part of her genuinely believed this was some kind of administrative mix-up that would resolve itself in 20 minutes. She signed in at the front desk at 12:23 a.m. The officer behind the counter barely looked up. Detective Harwell met her in the hallway outside interview room 2. He was younger than she'd expected from his voice. Maybe 35, with close-cropped hair and the kind of relaxed confidence that sometimes reads as professionalism and sometimes reads as something else. He shook her hand. "Thank you for coming in," he said, like she'd had a choice. The interview room was cold. She sat across from him at a metal table with a paper cup of water she didn't touch. He set a thin folder in front of him and folded his hands on top of it. "We received a complaint," he said, "alleging that you accessed patient records without authorization and shared protected health information with an outside party." She stared at him. "That's not true. The complaint was filed by the hospital's compliance office, which reports to..." She stopped. She could hear her own heartbeat. "Which reports to administration? Can you walk me through your activities on the evening of October 14th? She could. She did. She had been working a day shift that ended at 7, had stayed late to finish charting, had accessed exactly the patient records she was assigned to. She said all of this clearly in order, the way she'd been trained to report. She kept her hands flat on the table. Harwell listened. He took notes. He did not tell her she could leave. At 1:15 a.m., he said, "We may need to request your access logs from the hospital. I want you to know that this could involve a formal investigation." "Into what?" she said. "An allegation from the same department I reported to a licensing board. M's. Owen, Sergeant Owen." It came out before she could soften it. He paused. Something shifted in his expression, not hostility exactly, but a narrowing. "You served?" "Army Reserve, Medical Unit. I got home from my last deployment 14 months ago and went straight back to work at Mercy General, where I have had until recently an unblemished record." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the folder. "I need to ask you to surrender your hospital access badge while this investigation is ongoing." The floor seemed to drop slightly. "You can't. That's my livelihood. I'm scheduled for a shift in 18 hours. It's a standard precautionary measure." "Whose standard?" she said. "Because I've been a nurse for 7 years, and I've never seen a credentialed medical professional removed from patient care over an unsubstantiated complaint from the person they reported." Harwell didn't answer. He was already writing something on a form. She gave him the badge. She didn't know what else to do. She walked out of that building at 1:47 a.m. and sat in her car for a long time without starting it. Her phone was almost dead. She plugged it into the charger and sat with her hands in her lap and thought about everything she'd given up. The Army, the comfort of a more straightforward career, the relationships that had fractured under the weight of deployments and odd hours, and the particular loneliness of being the person who always noticed what was wrong. She had come back from all of that and built something here, something real, a reputation, a record, and now someone was trying to erase it. She did not cry. She was not that kind of tired yet. She started the car and drove home. The next 3 weeks were the slow part, the quiet siege. Her badge was suspended pending review. The hospital's HR department sent a letter confirming that she was temporarily reassigned from patient-facing duties while the compliance investigation proceeded. She could work administrative tasks from home, they said. She could answer emails. She answered emails. She also called every contact she had. A former Army JAG officer she'd kept in touch with, now in private practice in Raleigh. He listened carefully and said the compliance complaint had the texture of retaliation, but proving that was a different matter. An employment attorney in Claremont agreed to take an initial consultation. 2 of her colleagues at Mercy General, both of whom had filed safety complaints in the past 2 years, started texting her updates. One of them, a veteran ER nurse named Phil Quimby, the kind of person who had seen everything and still showed up, drove to her apartment one Saturday with coffee and the printed copies of every shift schedule from the past 18 months. "They changed your assignments the week after you filed," he said, spreading the papers on her kitchen table. "Look, same week, you went from primarily day rotation to split shifts, 2 days gap, then overnights. That's not random scheduling." "I know," she said. "I kept copies," he said. "I kept copies because I saw this happen to Torres before she quit, and I thought, I don't know what I thought. I thought maybe someone would eventually need them." She looked at him. He was maybe 55, gray at the temples, wearing a faded VA hospital hoodie. He'd served too, Navy corpsman, Gulf War era. There was something between them that didn't need to be said. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "Thank me when it's over." The investigation formally expanded in week 4. Detective Harwell called to inform her that the hospital had provided access logs showing she had opened the personnel files of 3 non-patient employees on October 14th. "I didn't do that," she said. "The logs were generated under my credentials," she said. "Someone used my login, or the logs were altered. I was in patient care from 6 a.m. to past 7 p.m. I have colleagues who can verify my location." There was a pause. "That's something you'll want to document formally." "I already have," she said, but she hadn't expected what came next. 1 week later, she received a letter from the State Nursing Board. A formal disciplinary complaint had been filed. The board was initiating a review that could result in suspension of her license. She read the letter standing in her kitchen. Then she sat down on the floor with her back against the cabinet because her legs had simply decided they were done holding her up for the moment. This was the trap. Not the police interview. Not the badge suspension. They hadn't come after her job. They'd come after her license. Everything she was, professionally, everything she'd earned across 2 deployments and 7 years of nursing, was now subject to a review initiated by the complaint of a man she had reported for retaliating against nurses who reported safety violations. She stayed on the floor for a while. Then she got up, went to her laptop, and started typing. Dr. Glenora Fitch had kept her head down since the investigation began. Daria understood that. Fitch had a family, a career, a department to protect. When Daria reached out, she half expected silence. Instead, Fitch called her back in 40 minutes. "I want you to know," Fitch said without preamble, "that I retained a copy of everything you gave me, all of it. And I want you to know that I've been in contact with the Patient Safety Advocacy Office at the state level. Quietly. Because what is happening to you is exactly what happens to people who do what you did, and I am not willing to be someone who watched it happen and said nothing." Daria sat down. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because they subpoenaed my files yesterday," Fitch said. "Which means they know I have them. Which means the timeline just accelerated. What do you need from me?" "I need you to hold on," Fitch said. "I need you to not settle, not retract, not go quiet. Can you do that?" "Yes," Daria said, and she meant it. But she didn't know yet what holding on would cost. The next 2 weeks were a different kind of hard. Not the paralysis of the first revelation, but the grinding effort of fighting on multiple fronts simultaneously. The employment attorney filed a formal response to the nursing board complaint, attaching shift logs, colleague statements, and a detailed timeline demonstrating that Daria had been at the bedside of patients during every minute the unauthorized access logs were supposedly generated. Phil Quimby submitted a written statement. So did 3 other nurses who had witnessed the scheduling retaliation firsthand. One of them, a travel nurse who had moved on to a different facility, had kept her own records. She sent them without hesitation. The employment attorney, a methodical woman named Renata Joel, who had spent 15 years on labor law and healthcare worker cases, walked Daria through what was happening. "Someone with administrative access to your hospital credentials altered those logs," Joel said. "It's not subtle, once you know what you're looking at. The timestamps don't align with your badge swipes in patient areas. The system should have flagged concurrent logins and didn't, which means someone either overrode the flag or altered the record after the fact. Can we prove that? We can show the inconsistency. Proving who did it, that requires the police to actually investigate it as a crime rather than treating you as the suspect. And will they?" Joel paused. "That depends on who else is paying attention." Someone else was paying attention. His name was Lieutenant Wyburn, and he had been with the Claremont PD for 22 years. He ran internal affairs, which was a job most detectives avoided, and he had a reputation for doing it without favor. He had heard about the Owen case from a colleague who found the initial interview odd. A medical professional brought in for questioning in the middle of the night over a complaint that originated with the exact department she had reported to a state board. Wyburn had pulled the file. He'd read it twice. Then he had asked Detective Harwell to walk him through the investigative steps. Harwell was not a bad cop. He had not been deliberately malicious. But he had received a complaint, followed the procedural path, and not looked hard enough at who was walking him down it. Wyburn looked hard. He cross-referenced the timestamps. He contacted the State Patient Safety Advocacy Office, which, as it turned out, was already in communication with Dr. Fitch. He requested the hospital's IT security logs through proper channels, which the hospital's legal team resisted for 4 days before being informed that resistance constituted obstruction. When the IT logs came in, they showed something specific at 8:47 p.m. On October 14th, an administrative account belonging to Grover Tillis's department had accessed Daria Owen's user credentials. The unauthorized personnel file access had been conducted from that same administrative session, which was then imperfectly, with the kind of sloppiness that comes from arrogance rather than expertise, attributed back to Daria's credentials. Wyburn sat with that information for 1 hour. Then he called the district attorney's office. Daria found out on a Tuesday morning. She was in her kitchen, second cup of coffee, working through emails from the nursing board that she had begun to think of as the new rhythm of her life. The administrative percussion of a fight she hadn't chosen but couldn't walk away from. Her phone rang. It was Renata Joel. "The DA's office has opened a criminal investigation into Grover Tillis," Joel said. "Tampering with computer records, obstruction of a licensing proceeding, and filing a false police report." Potentially more, depending on what they find. Daria set down her coffee cup very carefully. They're also reviewing the conduct of the compliance office staff who signed off on the complaint to the nursing board, Joelle continued. There's apparently documentation, internal emails, showing they were directed to file it by Tillis, who was fully aware it was retaliatory. The badge, Daria said. My access badge will be reinstated by end of week. The hospital's legal team has already indicated they're cooperating fully, which is what hospitals do when their alternative is co-defendant status in a criminal case. Daria stood at her kitchen counter and looked out the window. The yard below was brown, with November, the one scraggly tree she could see from this angle, stripped down to bare branches. She had been looking at that tree for 4 weeks. What about the nursing board complaint? She asked. Withdrawn, as of yesterday. Expunged from your record. She breathed out slowly. Daria, Joelle said, you did everything right. I want you to know that. I've done this work for 15 years and I don't say that to everyone. I almost went quiet, Daria said. 3 weeks ago, I almost called you and said I wanted to settle. I know. I could hear it. I didn't, though. No, Joelle said. You didn't. Grover Tillis was arrested on a Wednesday afternoon. It wasn't the kind of thing that makes national news. A mid-level hospital administrator walked out of a building between 2 detectives while the parking lot went still around him. But there were people watching. Phil Quimby was there, technically on his lunch break. He texted Daria 2 words. It happened. She was already back at work by then, day shift, trauma bay, the particular controlled urgency of the ER that she had spent years learning to move through. She was checking a medication order when the text came in. She read it once, put her phone back in her pocket, and kept working. At the end of her shift, she changed out of her scrubs and sat in the break room for a moment, just sat in the quiet with a cup of cold coffee she didn't drink. 2 of her colleagues stopped to say things, good things. One of them, a younger nurse fresh out of school, asked if she was okay. Yeah, Daria said. I'm okay. The younger nurse, her name was Bex. She was 24 and had the particular anxious brightness of someone who still believed everything would always work out if you were careful, sat down across from her. I heard what you did, what you went through. I just want you to say, I think it took a lot of courage to not give up. Daria thought about that. She thought about the kitchen floor, the dead phone, the weeks of emails and forms, and the grinding work of fighting something that should never have started. It wasn't courage, she said. It was stubbornness. Beck smiled. Maybe they're the same thing. The formal hearing came 6 weeks later. Daria was asked to testify before the hospital's board of directors as part of a comprehensive review of the compliance and staffing departments. She also gave a deposition in the criminal case against Tillis, which was building steadily. Additional nurses had come forward, 3 of them with documentation of their own, and what had looked like one bad actor with a vendetta against one particular nurse was expanding into a pattern that went back years. She sat in the boardroom of Mercy General on a gray January morning and told the truth. She had been doing that all along. She did it again in precise and specific detail, without anger and without performance, the same way she'd been trained to report in the field. Just facts, just sequence, just what she had seen and documented and known. Afterward, in the hallway, Dr. Fitch found her. The board is implementing a third-party complaints channel, Fitch said, independent of administration. They're also restructuring who the compliance office reports to. It's not everything, but it's something, Daria said. Fitch nodded. She looked like she'd been carrying something heavy for a long time and had only recently set it down. Thank you, she said, for not letting it stop. Daria looked down the long hallway, institutional carpet, fluorescent lights, the distant sound of the ER on the other end of the building. The place she had been coming to every day for 4 years. The place that had tried to take her license, her access, her credibility, her career. She was still here. I'm going to need you, she said to Fitch, to actually staff the overnight rotations fairly from now on, because I'm done covering for scheduling decisions made by people who no longer work here. Fitch almost smiled. I'll pass that along. Make sure it's in writing, Daria said. She walked back down the hall toward the elevator. Her badge was on her lanyard. Her shift started in 2 hours. The tree in her yard had started showing the first bare hints of buds. It was too early, probably, for January, but there they were. She had a job to do. She went and did it.